right, let's dive in. This time, we're headed back to Macomb, Alabama with Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird.
Always a good choice.
Right. And the excerpts you sent in, well, they focus on Scout's early life, her family, the Finches, and the mystery surrounding Boo Radley. Should be interesting.
Yeah, To Kill a Mockingbird. It's so full of details, symbolism, all that. Always a good book to revisit.
Absolutely. And speaking of details, I was struck by how important history seems to be to the Finch family. We learn about Finch's Landing, their homestead.
Oh,
It
yeah.
was self-sufficient, right? Simon Finch, way back when he established it. It produced almost everything they needed.
Mm.
I mean, everything except for ice, wheat flour, and clothing. Can you imagine? No Amazon Prime.
It's pretty remarkable. That level of self-sufficiency really says something about, well, the time period and their resilience. But it also makes you think about how connected their own personal history is with, those larger historical forces.
Mhm.
Lee even brings up Andrew Jackson's policies and their impact on the Creek Indians and ties that back to the Finches. Oh, wow.
It's like this subtle reminder that individual lives are always shaped by those past events.
Totally. Like ripples in a pond, right? One event can have this huge effect across generations. And then we have Atticus, Scout's father. He kind of breaks from that whole tradition, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Instead of staying on the land like his siblings, he became a lawyer.
What do you think about that choice? Especially back then.
It definitely sets him apart. Atticus seems to represent progress, education. His siblings, they seem more tied to the past. Makes you wonder about the family dynamic there.
Yeah. Curious about that, too. And thinking about family dynamics, there's that part where Scout doesn't remember her mother dying,
Yeah.
right? Because she was so young.
Right.
But Jem, he clearly feels that loss. There were those moments when he sighs, withdraws, even while playing.
Those little details, they get to you. It's like Lee's showing us just how deep kids' emotions run, how they handle grief and loss in ways we might not always, as adults, recognize.
Absolutely. And then there's Calpurnia, the housekeeper. She's black and plays such a huge role in raising Scout and Jem. I feel like Lee's kind of hinting at the whole complex racial and social dynamics of the story here.
Oh, for sure. Calpurnia is more than just a domestic worker, right? She's a caregiver, disciplines them, a source of wisdom. Through her, Lee subtly introduces those themes of race and class that, well, become so crucial to the story. But maybe we can move on to another interesting character, the mysterious Boo Radley. He really seems to capture the imagination, doesn't he?
Oh, absolutely. That description of the Radley place, so chilling, dilapidated, shrouded in shadows. Remember that line about the swept yard that was never swept?
Yeah.
It's like something out of like a Southern Gothic novel.
That's a great point. Lee is amazing at using those Southern Gothic elements, like creating this atmosphere of mystery and foreboding. It just adds to the whole mystique around Boo and his family, that feeling that something's lurking beneath the surface, literally and figuratively.
Right. And then there were all those rumors about Boo. His supposed misdeeds, his reclusiveness. No wonder the kids are so fascinated. Remember that where they're trying to get him to come out? They even try to send a note through the window.
That's classic, isn't it? Classic childhood curiosity mixed with fear. Trying to uncover the unknown, especially when it's right in your own neighborhood, speaks to that universal kid experience, finding something both terrifying and fascinating.
Totally. But I think it goes deeper than just childhood curiosity.
Yeah.
Don't you think Lee's using Boo to explore something more about how society treats people who are different, people who don't conform?
Oh, absolutely. Boo's like this blank canvas that the town projects all its fears and prejudices onto. He's a symbol of the other, the outsider, that society often, shuns or misunderstands. It raises questions about how we see and judge people who don't fit in, right?
Yeah. Boo's almost less a character and more a reflection of Macomb's own anxieties and prejudices.
Yeah.
It really makes you wonder how much of what people believe about him is actually true and how much is just, projection.
Exactly. And that whole theme of perception versus reality, Lee plays with that throughout the book, not just with Boo, but with other characters and situations too.
So true. Now, maybe shifting gears a bit, these excerpts also touch on Scout's first experiences with prejudice, starting with her first day at school, which doesn't quite go as planned.
Oh, poor Scout. She gets there with her advanced reading skills, thanks to Atticus, then clashes with Miss Caroline, the teacher. She means well, but she's a little inflexible. It's almost funny how Scout's eagerness to learn ends up backfiring in that rigid classroom.
This classic Scout, right?
Yeah.
That blend of innocence and blunt honesty often gets her in trouble, especially with adults who just aren't used to her. But it also shows Atticus's influence, how he's encouraged her to be herself, to think for herself.
You're right. It highlights these different approaches to education, the contrast between Scouts' informal learning at home and that structured, sometimes stifling classroom environment.
Yeah, and then there's that incident with Walter Cunningham. He's her classmate, and he's poor, can't afford lunch. Scout tries to explain his situation to Miss Caroline. Well,
It blows up in her face.
exactly.
That scene really brings the economic divisions in Macomb into focus. The Cunninghams are proud but struggling, and the system just seems to keep them down. It's through Walter that Scout really sees social inequality for the first time.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking seeing how poverty limits opportunities, even for someone bright and hardworking like Walter.
Ugh.
But I do like how Atticus steps in, uses it as a teaching moment. He tells Scout, you never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view, until you climb into his skin and walk around in it. What a lesson about empathy, right?
It is. Atticus isn't just lecturing, he's instilling a core value in Scout. Understanding and respecting others, especially those whose lives and experiences are different from her own.
And that seems to be a theme here, wouldn't you say? Atticus using those everyday moments to teach his kids about compassion, about seeing the world through different lenses. It's amazing.
It really is. Atticus is the moral compass of this whole story. His actions, his words, they all point to this deeper understanding of justice and equality.
And speaking of Atticus, there are some moments that really showcase his character, right? First, there's the incident with the rabid dog, Tim Johnson. Who knew Atticus was such a sharpshooter? Like, it's this hidden talent, and it comes out when the town needs him most.
It's symbolic, don't you think? It reveals this side of Atticus that people just don't expect. He's more than just a lawyer. He's capable of taking action when he has to.
Yeah. Makes you wonder what other hidden depths he might have. And then there's how he responds to Bob Ewell's threats. Even after Ewell spits in his face, Atticus refuses to fight back. He chooses the high road, protects his kids from that kind of hate. Really shows his character, I think.
For sure. Atticus embodies this quiet strength, a moral courage that doesn't need recognition. It's about doing what's right, even when it's tough, even when it means facing bigotry and hatred head on.
It's like this running theme with him, doing what's right no matter what.
Yeah.
Powerful message, especially considering the time period and the challenges he's up against. But before we go further, I'm curious to hear your initial thoughts. What's jumping out at you so far?
It's amazing how these excerpts show us, those subtle ways prejudice shows up, even in everyday stuff, like when Miss Caroline tries to give Walter Cunningham lunch money, remember that?
Oh, yeah.
It's a small moment, but it speaks volumes about those class divisions in Macomb.
Total classic Scout moment.
Oh.
So well-meaning, but totally clueless about the whole social situation. Her trying to explain the Cunninghams just makes it worse. It's a good reminder that good intentions sometimes are not enough, right?
Yeah.
Especially when you're dealing with those deep-seated social problems.
Right. And then we have Burris Ewells, right? Total opposite of Walter. Walter's quiet, dignified, even though he's poor. But Burris, defiant, disruptive. Only shows up for the first day of school because of the truant officer, then disappears. Really highlights how poverty keeps families like the Ewells trapped.
It makes you think about how different kids react to the same circumstances. Walter seems resigned, Burris lashes out. Do you think Lee is suggesting that even within the same social class, there are different levels of, resilience and hope?
It's an interesting point, and it's cool how Atticus uses both situations to teach Scout, right? He explains why the Ewells are the way they are, how they've been pushed aside for generations. It's like he's trying to make her see poverty differently, not just about individual choices, but about the system, too.
He's definitely pushing her to look deeper. You
Yeah.
consider those historical and social factors. It reminds me of his decision to defend Tom Robinson. He knows it's going to be an uphill battle, but he has to do what's right, even if people don't like it.
Exactly. Atticus is a great example of someone who walks the walk. He's committed to justice no matter what, even when it's risky.
It's a really powerful message, especially given all the racial tension in Macomb. But it's not all doom and gloom, right? Lee also gives us these little moments of pure childhood joy. I'm thinking about the knothole in the tree by the Radley place, the gifts.
Oh, yeah, those were interesting.
Chewing gum, Indian head pennies, those soap figures. It adds a touch of magic, don't you think?
They are fascinating. On one hand, they're just kid stuff, right? Fueling their fascination with Boo. But on another level, it's like this connection, however small, between them and this mysterious guy.
Like Boo's trying to reach out, communicate somehow. Makes you wonder if he's as scary as everyone thinks.
For sure. Those gifts really challenge the whole Boo Radley story. suggests there's more to him than just the scary stuff. Like, maybe under all that mystery is a kind person. That mix of darkness and light, innocence and experience, that's what makes To Kill a Mockingbird so good, I think.
Totally agree. And speaking of captivating, we can't forget about Jem losing his pants trying to get away from the Radley place. Goes back for them, risks his neck, and finds them mended, folded, hanging on the fence. Small detail, but
Says a lot.
right.
It implies that Boo's not just watching them, he's caring for them in his own way. Adds another dimension to his character, that tenderness, really goes against the town's idea of him as a monster.
Right. He's like this silent guardian angel looking out for these kids who are obsessed with him. And then Lee throws in that sudden snowfall, the first one in Macomb in decades. It's like nature itself is signaling a change, disrupting things.
Symbolic, isn't it? The snow represents a break from the norm, transforming the landscape. And it sets up the fire at Miss Maudie's house, emphasizes those themes of disruption and resilience.
Devastating event, but it also brings the community together. Everyone helps Miss Maudie. And remember, Scout gets that blanket put around her during the fire. Never explicitly said, but come on, it was Boo.
Right. It's a beautiful moment. Understated, but powerful. Another one of Boo's acts of kindness, going unnoticed by most people. Lee's so good at weaving those little details into the story, creating mystery and intrigue.
It's those little things you remember. Makes the story richer, more complex. But as winter becomes spring, the focus shifts to the trial of Tom Robinson. This is where the book dives into the reality of racial injustice in the South.
You're right. The trial becomes like a mini version of Macomb's prejudice and hypocrisy. Atticus defending Tom Robinson. He's going against everything his community believes in, right? He knows he's fighting a losing battle from the start.
It's incredible how Lee uses this trial to show how complex race, class, and justice are in a small southern town. It's not just Scout's childhood anymore. It's about confronting the really harsh realities of a system that's built on inequality.
Exactly. Atticus becomes a symbol of moral courage, standing up for what's right even when it makes him unpopular. He risks everything to defend an innocent man, knowing he's probably going to lose.
And it's more than just legal strategy, right? It's about fighting against the very idea of prejudice and bigotry. That scene where Atticus faces down the lynch mob outside the jail. Just him, his integrity, and a lamp. Powerful stuff.
So visually powerful, that scene. The dark mob and the light from his lamp. It's like that battle between ignorance and reason, hate and compassion.
And it's Scout, bless her heart, who unintentionally diffuses the situation. Remember, she just starts talking to Mr. Cunningham about his son Walter, their problems. So Scout, that unfiltered honesty, that genuine interest in people, often breaks down those walls of prejudice.
It's a perfect example of how human connection can overcome difference. In that moment, Scout reminds Mr. Cunningham they're both human, connected, not divided. It shows us that empathy and understanding can really change things.
It's like this flicker of hope in all that darkness.
Sure.
But the trial doesn't end well for Tom Robinson, does it? Despite Atticus, despite the evidence. Guilty verdict. It's a blow, not just to Tom, but to everyone who believes in justice. What do you think about that verdict, especially back then?
Heartbreaking, but realistic, right? It shows how powerful prejudice can be, how it can overpower reason and truth. The jury's decision reflects that deep racism of the time, the kind that affected everything, even the courts. Reminds us that progress takes time, it's painful, and sometimes even the best efforts fail because of those deep-seated biases.
It really shows the limits of the legal system, especially when it comes to protecting the vulnerable. But even with that loss, Atticus keeps going. He points out that the jury took longer to decide than usual, like some of them were actually struggling with their consciences, with the evidence that went against their prejudices.
That's important, right? It suggests that change is possible, even if it's slow. It's about never giving up that fight for what's right, even when it feels impossible.
And then Tom Robinson is killed trying to escape from prison, another tragedy. Just a brutal reminder of that systemic racism, how it denies basic human rights to anyone who's different.
Tom's death is a powerful reminder of what prejudice costs.
Yeah.
It underscores why Atticus's fight is so important and why it has to continue.
It's a fight that's still going on today, isn't it? The fight for equality and justice. To Kill a Mockingbird shows us what's at stake. But even with all the sadness, there are still moments of hope. Remember how the Black community supports Atticus and his family, bringing them food after the trial? Silent, but powerful.
Very powerful. It shows that even in those dark moments, community and compassion can shine through. And then there's Miss Maudie. She never loses faith in Atticus, never gives in to all that negativity.
Miss Maudie, She's like a shining light in the whole story.
Right.
Represents those people who refuse to be swayed by prejudice. The ones who see the good in people, even when everyone else seems to have lost sight of it.
She's a reminder that hope and resilience exist, even when things are really tough. But you mentioned Bob Ewell, right? That threat's still there. Tom Robinson's death doesn't make him disappear. He actually gets worse, targeting anyone involved at the trial. Judge Taylor, Helen Robinson, and most scary of all, Atticus and his kids.
It's terrifying how Bob Ewell escalates, all that hatred just boiling over. He represents what happens when prejudice goes unchecked, how dangerous it can be when fear and ignorance take over.
And that leads to the climax, right? When Jem and Scout are attacked walking home from the Halloween pageant. That scene is so suspenseful because it takes all those fears, those shadows, and makes them real. It's where that prejudice, that abstract threat becomes all too real. And in that moment, when they're terrified, the most unlikely hero shows up. Boo Radley.
Talk about a plot twist. The guy who's been like this source of fear and speculation actually saves the kids. He steps out of the shadows, literally and figuratively, to protect them from the very thing the town projected onto him.
It's like Lee flips the script, makes everyone, the characters, Annie, the reader, question their own prejudices. Boo, the recluse, the outsider, becomes the brave one, the selfless one.
And for Scout, it's a huge realization, right?
Yeah.
She finally sees Boo not as a monster, but as a person, someone capable of real kindness. All those rumors, the fear, he all disappears, and what's left is just, well, his actions.
It shows the power of empathy. By seeing Boo's bravery, Scout sheds those layers of prejudice, the fear. She sees him for who he is. A protector. A guardian angel, but not the kind you'd expect.
Totally. But after the attack, things get complicated, don't they? Sheriff Kate, he wants to protect Boo, so he insists that Bob Ewell fell on his own knife, even though, well, we know that's probably not what happened. Like doing the right thing for the wrong reasons,
It's a tough situation, ethically. Tate's bending the law, maybe even breaking it, to keep Boo safe from a trial, from all that trauma, and he wants Atticus, Mr. Integrity, to go along with it.
It's this tension between protecting someone vulnerable and upholding the law. Makes you think about justice, those gray areas where compassion might be more important than the rules.
It does. Makes us think about morality, those times when there's no easy answer. And it's Scout, even as a kid, who seems to get it.
That scene on the Radley porch, when Scout watches Boo go back inside, it's powerful. She understands that making him go public, even if it means the truth comes out, would hurt him. It would expose him to a world that just doesn't get him.
It shows how much Scout's grown, her empathy, her maturity. She knows that protecting someone can mean keeping them out of the spotlight, even if it means the whole truth isn't revealed.
She's learning that justice isn't always simple, that sometimes compassion means making tough choices. And that's one of the big messages of To Kill a Mockingbird, don't you think? It makes us confront our own biases, question what we believe, and try to make the world better, even if it means those tough choices.
It is. To Kill a Mockingbird stays with you. It makes you think about race, class, justice, good and evil. And it does it with so much heart, so much nuance, that it just keeps speaking to people generation after generation.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are your big takeaways? What makes To Kill a Mockingbird so powerful, so timeless?
I think it's the combination of like those universal themes and the characters. It's about prejudice, compassion, courage, and growing up in a world that isn't always fair. But we see it all through Scout's eyes. She's innocent, but she's also insightful. We experience Maycomb in this fresh way.
That mix of innocence and wisdom, it's what makes it so captivating. And it leaves us with questions, right? Like, what would it be like to walk in Boo Radley's shoes? To really see things from his point of view? And how can we, in our own lives, be more empathetic, more understanding?
Those are great questions. And that's the beauty of this book, It doesn't give us easy answers. It makes us wrestle with these complex issues, have those tough conversations, and try to be better people.
And on that note, we'll leave you with this. As you keep exploring To Kill a Mockingbird, remember what stories can do. They can challenge us, open our hearts, and inspire us to make a difference. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.